kind of blurry. That's better. Question. What kind of bear is best?
That's a ridiculous question.
False. Black bear.
Well, that's debatable. There are basically two schools of thought.
Fact. Bears eat beets.
Oh.
Bears beats Battlestar Galactica.
It's no longer a hot take to dislike The Office. NBC's sitcom began in 2005 and wrapped up in 2013. Now, 4 years later, it seems more socially acceptable to call it out on its flaws. I've watched the show in its entirety twice over the past 2 years, and something rather interesting stuck out the second time through. Jim sucks. Not just Jim, actually, but most of the characters on the show. Characters that fans fell in love with because of their quirky, zany personalities. Michael and Dwight might seem like the most flawed of the bunch, but it isn't until the series finale that there's any real character development with a number of the side characters like Meredith or Stanley. That being said, the focus here is on Jim Halpert, beloved Dunder Mifflin employee and the true villain of The Office. As it turns out, people have been calling out Jim for being the worst for a while now, because of his treatment of Dwight, Karen, Pam, and basically everyone else he works with. If it's so seemingly obvious that Jim is a big old jerk, why do so many people root for him? Why is his relationship held on a pedestal of relationship goals, like something viewers should strive for themselves? The mockumentary style and comedy verite mode of the show play a large role. Because of the way the narrative is framed, some characters are represented more than others, allowing for alignment and possible identification. The early basis of Jim's character is that he's a slacker. He doesn't care about his job or how he performs, and has little to no motivation. The only thing keeping him where he is an engaged girl who he may or may not have a shot with. While this exact scenario may not be relatable, the feeling of being trapped at a dead-end job or wanting something, or someone, you can't have is fairly universal. Little changes with this character until later seasons when he's promoted and eventually leaves Dunder Mifflin. One thing is for sure though, Jim's the villain of the show. Whether it's him confessing his love for and kissing unengaged Pam,
I'm in love with you.
What?
I'm really sorry if that's weird for you to hear, but I need you to hear it.
Listen, Jim.
or making Karen transfer to Scranton, only to use her to make Pam jealous.
Did you ever have a thing for Pam?
Pam? Did I ever have a thing for her? No. Why? Did she say something?
So glad you were Jim. He was hung up on Pam for such a long time. I didn't think he'd ever get over her.
Do you still have feelings for her?
Yes.
Or doing almost the exact same thing with Katie. Or gambling away his and Pam's money on his new company and then ditching his wife and 2 kids to move to Philadelphia. Jim's self-centered and narcissistic behavior makes it hard to root for him. And yet people love him. Jason Montell has argued that since the 1990s, there's been an unprecedented trend towards narrative complexity that blurs distinctions between episodic and serial narratives, as well as a heightened degree of self-consciousness, which is focused on both diegetic pleasures and formal awareness. This is where comedy verite, the mode of production, and the mockumentary genre come into play. The stylized nature of the two are designed for the text to appear natural and unscripted, to draw the viewer in, making them feel like they're part of the story world. In Too Bold for the Box Office, the mockumentary, from big screen to small, Cynthia Miller writes that there are places for social commentary, cultural critique, and the crisis of representation to collide, where humor meets reflection. They serve the role, as she says, of holding a mirror to our flaws, poking fun at our assumptions, and refusing to let us look away from the most cherished notions about reality. They lay bare the audacities, frailties, and well-guarded fantasies that bring them into being. In this case, the everyday absurdities of office jobs are highlighted and meant to be laughed at, rather than endured by those actually living it. The Office, being a multi-camera mockumentary, is split between the action of the series and talking head-style interviews. Because the style calls for the constant breaking of the fourth wall, we're able to see and hear from some characters more than others. Sometimes this is beneficial, but other times, like this one, it's negative.
Have a seat. Can I get you a beverage?
Yeah, I'd like to...
Great.
Greg Smith's work on character identification claims we as an audience are spectators who need to identify with the camera. By this he means we absorb information directly from what we are shown. The interview segments and fourth wall breaking of The Office help to achieve the spectatorship because what we get are highly selective internal thoughts and feelings of characters, or what are essentially monologues.
Still ought to talk to her later.
No, definitely. All right, dude. Awesome. Will do.
Do I think I'll be invited to the wedding?
Of the main cast, Jim, Pam, Michael, and Dwight are the most interviewed. While Angela talks about her dead cat, Jim talks about how he fell for Pam when he saw her, or bought a ring the week they started dating.
Have I not proposed to you yet?
I don't.
Oh,
No?
well, that's coming. I am not kidding. Got it a week after we started dating.
which is weird in and of itself. Or how he bought a house without asking her.
Yeah, I guess technically, Kev, you're right. Today's a big day. Today is the day that I show Pam the house that I bought for us. Without telling her.
We see and hear him talking about his failing relationship with Karen, and basically how he'd rather be with Pam. It's not just the interviews, though. It's those iconic Jim looks whenever something ridiculous happens in the office, and he looks directly at the camera in shock or disbelief. We as a viewer are meant to be overwhelmed in this chaotic office environment, and Jim is supposed to be the beacon of normalcy. He's arguably the most level-headed, or normal for lack of a better term, character, who often serves as a voice of reason. The humor, as Jane Roscoe and Craig Height explain, comes from the contrast between the rational and irrational, between a sober form and absurd or comic subject. One of the key pillars of comedy vérité, according to Tricia Dunleavy, is a focus on flawed, incorrigible characters via the recruitment of suitable figures from real life. We can see ourselves in these situations, and we can relate to the character most dumbfounded by what's going on. Jim's famous glances at the camera solidify this, because he's acting as a surrogate for the viewer. When Michael says something profoundly offensive, or Andy punches a hole in the wall after being terrorized by Jim, Jim looks at us as if we're in the room looking for someone to laugh with. Alignment comes from getting to know a character. These glances or interviews help us align with Jim because we get to see more of who he is as a person, rather than an employee. But identification is subjective. Who we identify with relates with who we most see ourselves in. That being said, there are tricks that can make us identify with characters just through camera work alone. Jim being a main character means we spend a lot of time around him in his storylines, while also giving us an in-depth look at his internal states. Smith also writes that producers can try to force identification by surrounding an immoral person, Jim, with more immoral or evil characters. In this case, the accidentally racist or homophobic tirades of Michael, or the bizarre behaviors of Dwight are contrasts with Jim's normalcy. His pranks are ways of staying sane in this environment while also keeping lighthearted. From his perspective, anyway. Even when he gains power in the office, his pranks against Dwight go unchecked, leaving Dwight to feel hopeless and trapped. If that's not an abuse of power, I don't know what is. So what have we learned? First, that Jim sucks. He puts himself and his wants ahead of other people without considering the consequences. He's manipulative and greedy, but audiences look past this because of his feigned lovability. Second, that the mockumentary style has much deeper storytelling meaning than one might have thought. And third, that narrative framing can be and is used to align and identify audiences with characters who may not be that favorable. So while Jim and Pam may be the cutest couple in the show, let's not forget how much manipulation and lying played a part in getting them there.
I know it's just, even if it was a great boss and a great job, I don't know if I want this.
Huh. It's a little out of left field.
Is it? Is it?